All right, let's send it back over to our special guests here. We got Max and Vadim here from Max Tech. Guys, I have been watching a lot of your benchmarks on the M1 Ultra, and I guess my question is there any point? Is there any point for anyone buying the M1 Ultra? I mean, you all did. I spent the extra money, the $2,000 upgrade, but watching all your benchmarks, it really seems like it just doesn't benefit me or even 99% of people at all to actually spend the extra money, even though I feel compelled like a moth to a flame to spend the extra money and do it. Is there any purpose in buying the M1 Ultra?
Do you want to feel better about your purchase? So let me know. What angle should we take?
You're going to tell your answer. I want the cold, hard truth here. I want the cold, hard truth. I mean, I'm doing what you're doing, right? So we're content creators, and we're making YouTube videos, at least you are. So does it benefit people like us?
Not really, no. So actually, what we're doing right now, before getting on this podcast, thank you guys for inviting us. And then afterwards, we're benchmarking video editing, both DaVinci Resolve, Final Cut, and Premiere Pro. Final Cut was just updated. Premiere Pro was just updated. So we're running new tests, retesting things. And for a lot of content creators, most YouTubers out there, there is no reason to go for the M1 Ultra. Now, obviously, you can get up to 128 gigs of RAM, which you could with previous Intel Macs, but with unified memory, it's way more efficient. It's way faster. The SSDs are faster, and you don't really need 128 gig if you needed it before. 64 is plenty. So for us, unless you're a high-end filmmaker working with raw footage and crazy color corrections, multi-layered, denoising.
So even for people like yourself, because you're putting out content, your content's 4K, right? Yeah, and even for you, it seems like, did you go with the M1 Ultra Max Studio? Because I know you bought like every single one they make, but which one did you keep? We have
3 of them, and I guess the top end one with the 64-core, 128 gig, definitely not worth it. The $4,000 one is great for some people. We also have the M1 Max, so we're going to make the final decision for Angelica, our main editor.
Yeah.
But for people like us, it is not really worth it. Now, on the flip side, if you're somebody that's working with applications that are CPU-based, which we talked about, I think a couple days ago we put out a video, that 20-core CPU can make a world of a difference. For example, if you're somebody it's your profession, you're making money with the system, you're using Lightroom, you're using Xcode, you're using those applications that can actually, Logic, that can scale well, it can make you a lot of money. So I gave one example in the recent video. If you're somebody that's doing a bunch of photo editing, for example, for real estate, you're sitting there half the time waiting for Photo Merge to run, and now it's twice as fast. You can make a couple grand more a month, every month, by taking on more work because of the time it will save you. And then if that's a single person, if you have a team, there's a bunch of companies out there that edit real estate stuff, and they have 20, 30 editors sitting there editing. Imagine how much more productivity that will bring you, how much more money you can make. That's 20 grand a month if you have a team like that. So for CPU, it could be a massive difference if you can actually benefit from it.
So, but when you say for people who are constrained by CPU performance, right? What applications is that? Because it seems to me like the only two that might take advantage of all the extra cores is Lightroom, oddly enough, and Blender. But other than that, it seems to me, this is just my sense of it. It seems like for regular folks, the M1 Ultra might be 20 to 30% faster than an M1 Max. And then for applications like Lightroom, like Blender, it might be closer to like 80% faster than an M1 Max. But for normal everyday usage, it doesn't seem like it's that much faster, maybe 20, 30%. Does that sense seem right to you?
Well, off the top of my head, I think in some cases Lightroom was, like 80% faster, 90% faster. So for some people, that can make a world of a difference.
Sure.
If you can take on 2-3 more edit jobs a day, you can make a couple $100 more a day. Now, if you're somebody just sitting there as a hobby doing it for fun and you work on one project a day, who cares if you can export it 80% faster if most of the time you're just, moving sliders around. But like Vadim said, Logic, Xcode. So if you're somebody that's coding and you're working on code most of the day and you're only compiling once at the end of the day and it is 30% faster, for example, which I think that's what we saw, does it really matter? No. But if you're compiling 20 times a day and each time you're saving that time and you're sitting there waiting, that's where you have to look at your workflow. What are you doing? What are you limited by? You can go into Activity Monitor and see, is it the CPU that's maxed out when you're sitting there waiting for something to happen, or the graphics? And then are you making money from it? And does that extra time matter if it could be 80% faster or 30% faster?
And you said Logic is one of the applications, because I use Logic and I use iStat menus. I think, do you guys use iStat menus as well? Whatever you use to track, you do. Okay, so it sits in the menu bar and you can see what's happening with your CPU and your GPU and everything. It's actually really cool. And with Logic, every time I export, it seems like only one CPU core is being utilized and all the rest are just sitting there. So you think that editing in Logic will actually will benefit from the M1 Ultra?
So there are definitely improvements. It is CPU based. There's also memory if you're doing a bunch of plugins and stuff. So this is where it comes down to how heavy are you hitting the system. If you don't have a bunch of tracks, a bunch of plugins, things that really take resources, you don't need all that power. Now, getting back to the video editing side, for a stream like this where you're going to cut off the beginning, maybe the end, maybe add some music, couple titles, you can buy an M1 Ultra, but you're not going to benefit, because you can even buy an M1 MacBook Air, and for the work you do, if you're not pushing it that hard, you're not going to see a difference. So that's where you also put into perspective, are you maximizing the current system? Because even the M1 MacBook Air is so much faster than a lot of previous Intel higher end Macs. So that's why we always get into it, like with the Mac Studio video compared to the Mac Mini. I said, for a lot of people, you can buy the $700 Mac Mini and it will do the job and do it better than your previous Mac Intel-based one that you might have bought for $2-3 grand. So...
yeah, it's an interesting observation. I feel like the M1 is just so much more powerful than Intel that, and we even said this when it came out, it was beating my MacBook Pro. I have a 2019 MacBook Pro, and I felt like it was blowing away my MacBook Pro in a lot of the video editing tests that were happening at the time. And I was like, dude, this thing's insane. Like, finally, not only can you actually edit on a MacBook Air, but you can edit 4K content on a MacBook Air. I don't think that was possible pre-M1. And so they came out swinging so hard with the M1 that I feel like they actually shot themselves in the foot in a way, because now they're struggling to find a way to actually give pros a better option. And the M1 Ultra is their way of saying, well, you can get double the performance, which theoretically is true. But when you do the actual benchmarks, I was shocked to see that that's not really what you get, because most applications can't even take advantage of it. Or if they do, like... they updated After Effects, Adobe After Effects this week to be M1 optimized. And they said that with the M1 Max, it would run up to 2 times faster in some of their render tests. And then with the M1 Ultra, it would run up to 3 times faster. And I was like, wait a second. With the M1 Max, you're getting double the performance, but the Ultra, which is two maxes, you're only getting an extra, 100% or 50% in performance increases. The returns there, the diminishing returns there, again, make it hard to justify the extra, $2,000 with the M1 Max or the M1 Ultra.
Some information that we got recently based on what's limiting the M1 Ultra, and I made a tweet about this, and we put it into our recent review, but maybe it's not explained that well. But basically, there's like a bottleneck that's impacting the M1 Ultra more than the M1 Max, and it has to do with something within the hardware. And because of that, it's not able to utilize the GPU all the way. And then on top of that, there's another issue with the encoders. It has double the video encoders and decoders for like H.264 and H.265. However, because of how the compression works and because of how the encoding and decoding works, it seems like right now it's only using one set. So it's basically like the encoders and decoders are still like the M1 Max. And we actually ran tests where we encoded... go ahead.
One set out of how many?
Well, it comes with 2 sets, right? So 2 encodes, 2 decodes. So it's supposed to...
It sounds like a lot of these are optimization problems that you're talking about with the software, right? Is that what you're seeing? That the developers haven't optimized this stuff properly for this new architecture?
Well, kind of, right? Because you're saying that part of it is software, but the part of it is actual like a hardware limitation.
Yeah, there was basically something that was overlooked, and I guess the Apple engineers did not think it would be a limitation, but it ended up being a limitation as they started adding more cores with the highest end M1 Max and the M1 Ultra, and then they found that out. So hopefully it's going to be fixed in the future. But if everything was optimized perfectly, it would run just all the way to the top, 105 watts. But now it's being limited because a lot of developers are just getting it over to metal. They're like, oh, it works. Apple Silicon, sweet, good to go. We're done. We're not going to put any more money towards investing in recoding and redoing everything, basically. But getting back to the encoders, it seems like only the video encoders and decoders from the M1 Max are running while you're exporting a video instead of using both.
Mm-hmm.
How the compression works. So we actually tested it. So we compare the M1 Max and the M1 Ultra encoding H.264 to H.264 with no other GPU effects, and it was exactly the same time. Same thing for HEVC.
Oh, no.
Exactly the same time. So it's only using basically one M1 Max media engines for that. However, for ProRes, we did see almost 2 times more, right?
Yeah, close to linear.
50 to 80%.
Oh, okay. There's some good news. So we just got a Final Cut 10.6.2, which I know you have been waiting for. I have been too, because I was like, when we got the M1 Ultra and we started seeing the benchmarks, I was like, wait a second, there's something way off here. In fact, it was so way off that I thought maybe I was not understanding the problem correctly, but the M1 Ultra just didn't seem to be performing and much better than the M1 Max in most tests. And I know you all have been testing the newer version of Final Cut Pro, and can you give us some high-level insights here? Like, does it resolve any of the problems that we've been seeing in performance with the M1 Ultra? No. That is truly mind-boggling.
That's disappointing.
I mean, so any application company, they could say, oh, up to 2 times faster, or we made something better. But just because they say it could be up to 2 times faster, it means maybe in one task for one specific case at the hardest workload possible, they achieve that. But then everything else, hasn't changed much. So the new version has a couple of features added. I don't know why they waited a month since the announcement or more to release it when on stage, the numbers they gave, that's the software they were using. So in general, all the stuff we looked at, we're not seeing any of the bottlenecks that were there before that they've been fixed. Maybe somewhere in the timeline, something can get smoother, something very vague, but overall, it's not a big difference at all.
So I don't know if you said this already. I know you were considering your decision here, but are you going to keep the M1 Ultra Max Studio? Because if you guys don't keep it, now I'm seriously thinking that I shouldn't keep mine. Because honestly, like, if you guys don't need it, you're creating so much content that it makes me think, okay, I should just get rid of it and buy the M1 Max version, because that's probably, that value proposition, I think that was probably my most, the most exciting thing that they announced at the keynote event. I was like, you can get an M1 Max now for $2,000. And you look at a spec'd out MacBook Pro with the same specs, and it was like $3,500. I'm like, this is a crazy good value if you don't need the screen and the keyboard. So Do you know what you're going to do yet?
So basically, after we're done with this video that we're going to finish testing and shooting today, we got to talk about it and see which one. So Angelica's been using an iMac, the 24-inch iMac with the M1 and 16 gigs of RAM since that came out for the main editing machine.
Yeah.
And it works. It works great. The only limitation we have sometimes is the encoder speed, just if we need to get a video out as fast as possible, and sometimes 16 gigs of RAM can be a limitation. Mm-hmm. Now, logically, and we should be keeping the $2,000 Mac Studio, because the $4,000 and $5,600 ones that we ordered, we're not going to get any benefit for what we're doing. Literally. Even right now, our main thing we wanted is be able to export faster with the quad encoders that they have in there compared to M1.
Right.
But we're not seeing that improvement right now.
Oh
so
my gosh, that's so unbelievable.
And you should keep the $2,000 one. Now, for us, the other difference is we got to create content. When new Macs come out, other PCs need to have a system here to compare it to. So that's where the other side comes in of maybe we should keep it, even though it won't make a difference, just so that we can use it for future videos.
The funny thing is like, that's where my mind is at too. I'm like, I don't seem to be realizing any actual benefits from this, but maybe in the future things will change, or maybe Apple will release some kind of update that will release the hidden power.
Actually, we have some information where there's a chance the next version of macOS could utilize some of those encoders and decoders. Okay. But we'll leave it at that for now.
Yeah.
Is that some inside intel direct from your sources?
Yes. So.
Okay. Very nice. Very nice. Juicy.